Good morning and happy Monday. Just as I was getting ready to come on here, I heard myself saying happy Friday. and, it's only Monday, so no happy Friday yet. But happy Monday. I hope you had a good weekend. I am just cruising right along with my week, and I'm here at the studio, and of course my phone is trying to ring right now. And weirdly, it was a Yarny calling me. So, Erin from Three Irish Girls, if you're watching, I can't answer because I'm on Facebook Live. Good morning, Greene. Nice to see you. Hi, Lori. So, it's nice to be here. Hi, Christy. Nice to see you all. I came today with a message I've been thinking about over the weekend. Hi, Sue. I've been thinking about, I notice people's posts and commenting about, hi Luana, commenting about their projects, hi Leslie, and their knitting and what they're working on. And every once in a while, someone's like, oh, well, I did everything right, but my sweater doesn't fit. And so people are, that's, hi Tina. So people feel that, you're like, oh, I think I did all the things right and my sweater doesn't fit and it's frustrating. And I wanted to talk about that because there is happy International Women's Day. Thanks, Christy. So I wanted to talk about that because sweater fit isn't a mystery. It's not magic. It feels like magic sometimes. And I know myself when I was a sweater knitter before I was a designer and before I understood the design process. Good morning, Cece. Good morning, Shelly. Before I was a designer, I did not fully understand how sweater patterns worked either. I can't believe I'm saying this in public, but I really wasn't that, I didn't knit gauge swatches. I didn't know about blocking. I certainly didn't really understand how to choose my own size. Morning, Tracy. Morning, Kim. So I was choosing my size based on my bra size. And I thought, well, that must be my sweater size. And so things never really fit properly, but I didn't really know why. I never knew if it was me or if it's the pattern. Hard to know, right? And as I became a designer, I began to realize that patterns and knitting, it's all just math. And the math always checks out. The variable is us. We are the variable. And so when you knit something and thank you, Chris, and you get to the finish line and it doesn't fit, you have to take all these steps back and ask yourself, all right, where did I go astray on this process? Where did I miss the boat? A lot of times it's that we don't choose the right size to start with because we aren't fully aware of what size we should be choosing. I usually, in FIA, for example, I put a lot of time and energy into talking about how to check your measurement, how to choose your size. Hi, Katie. Hi, Diane. Hi, Gigi. So I've really put a lot of time into teaching people how to pick a size that's right for the amount of ease, wiggle room that you want for your sweater, and how to make sure your gauge matches the gauge of the pattern, because those two things, the size you choose and the gauge you create, hi Jan, those are the only two factors really that determine if your sweater is going to fit. Now, this is not talking about, if your Aunt Belinda made a sweater pattern, but she's never done that before, and you're knitting her sweater pattern and she doesn't maybe have all the math worked out. There is a time where maybe the math isn't right, but in a professional pattern, it has been tech edited. The tech editing includes not just making sure it has the periods in the right places and the right abbreviations, but it also checks all the math to make sure, hi Kathy, to make sure that the math works. So the math is throughout that process, and it all starts with the gauge swatch. Hi Kari. So it's really important that we keep all of those factors in mind when we're getting ready to knit ourselves a sweater. I'm a sweater knitter at my core. That's my thing. I think all of us have sort of a favorite, maybe not all of us. Now that I think about it, some people might just love all the things. I'm thinking of my sister, hi Deborah, who she loves all the colors, my sister Anna, and I bet you she loves all the knits too. Like she probably doesn't have a favorite, but I love sweaters the most. And I just feel such a sense of satisfaction when I get a sweater finished. But I want it to fit. You want your sweaters to fit because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of yarn, and yarn is spendy sometimes, right? So especially a sweater quantity, even if you're getting the most affordable yarn that you can find, it still adds up. And yes, Vicki, keeping a journal really helps because you can look back at your process and see, what size did I choose, and what are my measurements? The other thing that's interesting that can happen is as you're knitting, so we knit a swatch. So some of you maybe are new to the swatch train. I'm a big time swatcher. I love swatches. I think it's just absolutely really powerful for your knitting because it helps you make sure you're going to get what you expect. If you're not on the swatch train, I want to bring you on board. Come on board my swatch train because it's just so important and it makes your knitting so much better. But even if you swatched, sometimes we talk about, hi Leslie, yes, your knit camp journals, yay. Sometimes we talk about how swatches lie, and it's not, I think I have a hair sticking right here, don't I? Where is it? Right there, sticking right up. Is it driving you crazy? I didn't see it. Anyway, yes, actual size versus wannabe size. Chris Ann, hi Nancy, hi Barb. So swatches, the reason they lie, they don't really lie, but the reason they lie is because we treat our swatches like precious baby angels. And we are, Heidi, I'll try and answer that question in just a bit. We are like so attentive to our little swatches, and they're so precious, and we want it because we're trying to get our gauge right? Hi Sharon. And so you're like paying really good attention, and you are really, making sure your needles are right and you're focused. And Vicki, I'm really proud of you. She's joined Team Swatch. Good job. And oh, Dana, good job. You keep a journal on everything you knit. I love it. So you knit that swatch, you pay really close attention, you do a great job. Your swatch is this precious, sweet baby angel. You love it. You show it off. You're like, I got gauge. I'm going to go. And then you start knitting. And then life happens. And you are like knitting while you're listening to the neighbor's dog bark. And you're knitting while you're watching the Oprah interview with Meghan and Harry last night. Oh my gosh. You're knitting while you're having a glass of wine. You're knitting while you're talking to your friends. You're knitting while you're on a plane or while you're waiting in the car or at the DMV. Life starts happening while you're knitting. And as life starts happening, you might relax or you might get more tension. It depends what's going on in your life. Those little variables can mean you don't have the same focus you had when you swatched. That focus is sometimes what throws us off. You want to swatch like you're gonna knit. So I know, right, Greene? You want to swatch like you're gonna knit. So if you knit while you're watching TV and while you're distracted and while you're doing all these things, swatch that way too. Swatch with a glass of wine, swatch while you're watching Oprah, swatch while you're doing this. Terry, you write all your info on your pattern and you keep your swatch with your pattern. That's great. But you want to make sure your swatch represents real life. You don't want that to be like the mannequin in the window. You want that to be a real map, a real insight. I like to think of this beginning process. Yes, you learn about yourselves, Christy. You learn, yes, swatch like a hot mess, Kim. I do like it. Lori, that's another thing that I do, mid-project blocking. Like as you're going along, if you start to panic, there have been many projects that I just thought I did not like and I was going to frog them, and I blocked them partway through, just like the real thing. Like I soaked half a sweater with the needles on it and everything, rolled it out, pinned it out so I could ease my mind, and that often helps. But there are just all of these factors. You must knit uptight all the time, Leslie. It's okay. We all have, we kind of channel a lot of the stress in our lives, a lot of our worries, a lot of our thoughts. I feel like we process a lot of that while we're knitting. And that's one of the reasons I like to have a lot of stockinette so that I can think a lot while I'm knitting. And I feel like the busy movement of my hands allows me to kind of process what I'm thinking. But because of that, we do experience these variations. So to start with, ask yourself before you knit a sweater, or if you've knit a sweater recently that didn't fit you like you thought it should or like you wanted it to, we need to go all the way back to the beginning, and we need to ask ourselves the questions of, what size am I actually? I have a class it's actually not open right now, but when we're making some changes to my website, as soon as those are done, my classes will be back. But I have a couple classes on sweater fit. And if you feel like you need more information, a class would be a great way to go. But the long and short of it is to go back to the beginning and say, what are my actual measurements? Sometimes we don't want to measure ourselves because we're like, I'll just kind of guess. I'll get close. I think I know what size I am. I have had people, oh my gosh, a couple of years ago, someone sent me an email and said that she was knitting, oh gosh, I can't remember which one it was, but she was like, I'm knitting the largest size. Hi, Beth. Hi, Sharon. And she's like, I'm knitting the very largest size because I always get the large size at the store. And I was like, well, there's a difference between a store size large and the very largest size in the spectrum of any given pattern. Those vary. You don't know what those numbers, I mean, they depend on the pattern, they depend on the designer, the fit, the ease. And I was like, if you're knitting the top number in this pattern, that finished measurement is 64 inches circumference. So what size is your circumference around your bust? And so she measured and she was like 44. So obviously 20 inches of positive ease, that 20-inch difference, that's more extra room than she wanted, but she wasn't exactly sure how to choose the right size for herself. So it's really helpful just to start there. Know what your measurements are. Make sure that when you're looking at the size, that you're choosing your size correctly. And sometimes, listen, I get it. You want to just jump in and start knitting. Me too. That's why I knit a lot of sweaters that didn't fit. Oh, that's perfect, Dallas. She says, Dallas is the same size as the yarn shop owner. Jumped in the Foxtrot, a sample, fit perfectly, knit the same size. That's great. Yeah, it's very important that we know what sizing is about. We understand ease. Because if you're thinking, okay, my bust circumference is 56 inches, what size? I guess I'll knit this one that comes out at 56 inches. But then that means it's the exact same size as you. And that's not the kind of fit you usually want for a sweater. Normally, it depends on the sweater. But we have to make sure we're not knitting exactly we are giving ourselves a buffer, ease, positive ease, which is often built into patterns. Chris Ann, you need to learn how to determine how much yarn I need to add for a large sleeve width on the fitted patterns. So are you talking about like if you make your sleeves a little bigger, like the body a little bit smaller and you make the sleeves a little bigger? It's going to vary so much. One of the things that impacts yarn consumption that we don't often think about is the row gauge. So we can get stitch gauge and we're like, oh yeah, I'm using the same yarn, I'm using the same needles, my stitch gauge is perfect. There are other things that come into play. If your rows are more packed in there, little more dense, a lot of times we don't look at row gauge. Although my community knows, I talk about row gauge a lot, especially if you're doing top-down seamless sweaters, that row gauge is really important because of how that sweater shape happens. Fat arms, Chrissy and me too. I got fat arms. Yeah, I got the beefy arms. Tina, your biggest decision is how to choose a size that works for your chest and your caboose. That would be a great time to think about how to modify and do a little more room as the sweater goes down, so that you kind of like adding darts to increase some shaping as you get, kind of toward the hips, give you a little bit more room there. It kind of depends on the pattern. Mom arms, right, Rhonda? Yeah. It depends on the pattern because some patterns do work really well, like super easy. If they're all stockinette, you can squeeze in some shaping, add some extra darts, some extra room. Or like for example with Fia, I know a lot of you have just recently finished your Fia cardigan. All of the cables, they're so beautiful. That's really heavily textured, a lot of cables, a lot of double moss stitch, and that's a little more difficult. And one thing you can do that's like a little bit of a cheat is if you start, well, actually with Fia, we start at the bottom. So knit the bottom with bigger needles so that you get that more ease, and then you go down needles as you get closer to the top. But you know what? We're knitters. And the best part about being a knitter is that we're basically crafting our own clothes. We should be able to adjust and adapt to make them fit our own size. We're making custom clothes. Alicia, that's a great question. She asked, what is the importance of row gauge? So row gauge, I'll just pull up this little beanie. So we measure stitch gauge, which is across side to side, right? Row gauge is this distance from there to there, right? And how tightly we pack those rows affects a couple of things. If you're knitting something, I'm going to think of the simplest explanation for this is, let's say we're knitting a square. Oh, Lori, you both took pictures of your Fia, and the difference in your back cables is crazy because of being a looser knitter. Yeah, it makes a big difference. Anyway, so let's say you're knitting a square, and one set of instructions says knit, I'm just going to give you like a homework assignment if you want to try this so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. If the pattern says you should have 20 stitches and 26 rows in 4 inches, and you decide I'm going to cast on 20 stitches and I'm going to knit until I reach 26 rows, set that aside, then do another one where you cast on 20 stitches and knit until you reach 4 inches. And the depth may be different because of the row gauge. Now, if you're knitting a bottom-up sweater or from the armpit down where it says knit to this many inches, that's fine. Because no matter how many rows are there, you're still gonna get to the right number of inches. The only thing that might happen is if you have more rows in there than someone else, you might have used more yarn because it takes more times around to reach the distance. Now, if you're knitting a top-down seamless sweater, let's say we start here, and let's say we have a very specific number of rows from here to here where we separate the sleeves and we start knitting that lower body. So from here to here, we don't say go until this many inches. We say this row, this row, this row, this row, this row until you get to this many stitches. It's a specific number of rows. So if you have shorter, like denser rows and you're packing more in, by the time you get to that stitch count, by the time you get to that line of instruction, you might not have gone as far. So your arm depth could be a lot shorter, even though you followed the instructions. But if your rows are too packed together, you're gonna hit that arm sleeve divide sooner. Not in rows, but in inches. Does that make sense? Lawana, well, I talk a lot about this on my blog too. So you can definitely look on my blog because I talk about on oliveKnits.com. And I know, Vicki, it's a lot of learning as you go. I could give you all of the tricks and write them all down, but here's the thing. I've already done that. Like I've put out thousands of sweater tricks in my patterns and on my blog. And the thing is, until you actually apply them and use them in your own project, in your own knitting, it doesn't really stick. So it does take that trial by error, that learning as you go. Yes, Pamela, your row gauge changes more than your stitch gauge with blocking. Yes, and so one of the things, hold on, let me just make sure that we've got, all right, we're good. I had a little like Wi-Fi thing. Hopefully you can still see me. Can you still see me? Can you still hear me? Hopefully, we're gonna go with it. So when you knit a swatch, let's say you got stitch gauge, but you didn't get row gauge. That's really common. But sometimes all you have to do, change the needle size, go up a size of your needle. Usually it's because you have more rows packed into the space than you want. And you still see, thanks, Jane. And so when you are swatching, knit another swatch with one needle size higher. Sometimes it doesn't really affect the stitch gauge, but it changes the row gauge. And that's something we don't think about. I've taught so many classes where my students have said to me, I don't measure row gauge. I don't pay attention to row gauge. But row gauge really does matter. It can mean that you run out of yarn faster. If you're knitting top down and seamless, it can make that arm drop a little too snug. Those are the two main things. Yes, Vicki, absolutely. You're gonna do it. Make your own spreadsheet. Tina says, I'll go up needle sizes at the top since I can be hit or miss with row gauge to make sure it isn't too short. You know, there are, like with Fia, for example, Fia was bottom up, and then you separate the fronts from the back, and then you just knit those to a number of inches. That's really helpful because even if your rows are dense, you're still gonna get to the right number of inches. Hi, Jennifer. The other thing to keep in mind is one thing that impacts our gauge is our yarn choice. Oh, Kim, Anna, and I are both spreadsheet fanatics. Spreadsheets forever. Like, I wouldn't be a designer without spreadsheets. They're my life. But as you are knitting, if you are getting really different row gauge than the pattern, one of the things is to look at your yarn. Are you using yarn that is creating the same type of fabric? Because, because you can actually get gauge in theory. Like if you measure, you have the right number of stitches, but not actually create the right fabric. When you're looking at that fabric, if it's supposed to be dense, but you can see a lot of light through it, or it's supposed to be really loose, but yours can practically stand up on its own because it's so dense, those are other things to keep in mind. And that fabric will also impact the row gauge. You'll see that more in the row gauge than even in the stitch gauge. How many of you, raise your hand, if you have done wishful swatching? Hi, Marie Arnett. Wishful swatching. Who's done it? Give me a thumbs up. Wishful swatching. Wishful swatching. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Yeah, me too. Me too. Wishful swatching is when you're like, I want to make this yarn work. I'm determined to make this yarn work. Hi, Nydia. And so you make it work. It's okay, Elena. I'm telling you what it is. It is when you force your will on your swatch. Wishful swatching is when you're like stretching it a little bit, or you're like packing it back into place, and you're like, oh yeah, that's good. I got it on there. And you're like trying to make it behave. You know, it's like all dressed up nice for show, right? I know. We've done that. And that wishful swatching is what makes our sweaters a bit of a surprise in the end, because wishful swatching is like, it's a time saver in the beginning, but it's kind of cheating, and it doesn't really get you the results you want. So if I can, kind of circle back to where we started this morning's chat, it's that if you want your sweater to fit, you've got to be honest with your swatch, and your swatch has got to be honest with you. And so like Kim said earlier, the hot mess swatching, yeah, swatch for real. Exactly, Marie Arnett. Only a half stitch off. Oh my gosh, I say this all the time, but I cannot say it enough. So many times people will say, my gauge was close. Yeah, close is not close. When you actually look at the math, I've done it. I am the first to admit, especially before I started designing patterns, and I didn't fully understand why swatching was really important. I didn't understand the math behind it. So how can I expect other people to understand that? I didn't get it. I was just knitting things that I found in magazines, and I was like, this is good. And so when you are kind of fudging the numbers and you're like, it's pretty close, you end up with results that aren't what you expected. I have myself knit sweaters, spent a lot of energy on them years ago that did not fit, and I didn't know why they didn't fit. I didn't know why. And so if you don't know why, don't feel bad. It's all this combination of things. Okay, hold on. So what if you don't get row gauge then? Then what? Leslie, a couple of things. One is if I don't get row gauge, I contemplate if I'm using the right yarn. If you've got any of my books, if you have taken any of my classes, if you're in knit camp, you've heard me talk about this. I've talked about it on my blog. Always make sure that you're using the right yarn for the job, that it's the right kind of fiber content. Different fiber contents will fill the space differently. And if you're substituting, let's say the pattern is this rustic wool and you're using kind of an alpaca silk something blend, the way those stitches fill space, the way that fiber fills space, fills space is going to be different. So the first thing is, am I using the right kind of yarn to get the right row gauge? Because it does need to have a similar capacity to fill that space. Second is, do you need to possibly go up a needle size? I hardly ever see people's rows longer. Like, what I usually see is people's rows are denser than the pattern. So like the pattern says 20 stitches, 26 rows, and they have 20 stitches and 28 rows. In that case, maybe going up a needle size would do it. The other thing is you can squeeze in some ghost rows. That's something I've taught in knit camp and in some of my sweater classes, which is as you're going down, squeezing in some rows that don't become part of the pattern. They have to blend into the texture and whatever, but you don't really count them. They just add to the depth to compensate for the difference in your row gauge. This is a lot of information. I just woke up this morning on a tear about talking about sweater fit, because this is something I feel like I've already talked about this a million times, but honestly, we can't talk about it enough. There is so much that goes into it. And every time you hear me say this, you might take away one new different thing that you didn't hear last time, or that you never tried, or that you thought, oh, I know you keep saying that, but it's fine. I'm just going to skip that part. Maybe today's the day where you're like, okay, maybe I better stop skipping that part. Elena says, I find that I always swatch, but the longer I knit on the pattern, I must relax because my gauge is different. Absolutely. It will be very common because you start to ease into it. You're not as focused and tense because you're like, oh, I've got this going. I know what I'm doing. And you'll start to relax. Very common. Right, Rhonda? Numbers don't lie. Barb, hopefully I kind of answered a little bit about the ghost rows for you. Heidi says, I used to knit way too large cardigans. I wasn't sure of my measurements and I never swatched. Not surprising that I've frogged a lot in my past. Me too, friend. Me too. Very common to knit things based on what we think and not based on the facts, just the facts. But those facts, the swatching, the numbers, I think the most important takeaway, honestly, is that a pattern is just math. A pattern is made of numbers. The stitches, the fabric, it's all math and numbers. We think of it as artsy because we're like, oh, I'm knitting, I'm making this thing, it's creative. But at the core of it, it really is math. And the numbers are the numbers. The only variable there, so it's not like, I don't know how this sweater is going to fit. If you do all of the things, it will fit. The problem is we cut corners, we fudge a little, we do wishful swatching, we try and make it work. Sometimes we're tired of knitting, so we make things a little short, or we don't trust the pattern and the pattern says stop here because it's going to grow if you use the same yarn. And you're like, I use the same yarn, but I don't believe you that it's going to grow enough, so I'm going to keep going. And then you block it and it's like a foot too long. These things all happen. But you know what? The best remedy for any of this is just to knit sweaters. Knit more sweaters. The more sweaters you knit, the better sweater knitter you're going to be. Beth, slow as you go. You're 2 rows away from the divide on Fia. That's wonderful. It is very confusing, Leslie. Don't feel bad. This is a lot of information. And that's why I keep talking about it, because there is never too much good information about how to knit great sweaters. A lot of it is repetition, and it's just doing it over and over until you start to learn, oh, like the light's going to go on at all these various points in the process. One thing that I found is if you knit, like let's say you knit, what patterns did I make? Soundtrack. Okay, you knit Soundtrack. It's a top-down seamless yoked sweater, and you knit it and you're like, okay, I made it a little too big. If you really, to really learn, you could knit that again and do a smaller size so that you can really start to understand your size in that particular designer's work. I think that's why a lot of people sort of find a designer that they like and they knit a lot of that designer stuff, because the results become more predictable because they kind of design similar fit kind of throughout their patterns. Doesn't mean there's not variations, but sometimes that makes it easier to start to figure out while you're learning, especially while you're trying to get comfortable with your size and with the fit and the ease. Because, every designer does do things differently, and I think we kind of bounce around, which is still great. I'm not saying don't bounce around, but I'm just saying if you're trying to really like cement some of this sweater knowledge, it can help if you find someone and you knit a couple of their things and you start to kind of compound what you learned. And then you'll start to see, oh, okay, this is the ease I like. Because every time we're just switching to all these different things, we're trying all these different things, sometimes all those pieces don't come together as like cohesive information. We're like, we learn a little thing and we learn a little thing and a little thing, but we don't realize fully like how they come together. So even if you knit the same sweater twice, just to see what you could learn. I know that's really boring. To be honest, I rarely knit the same sweater twice, so maybe don't listen to me. But if you have the patience to knit the same sweater twice, if you're learning and you're trying to really cement fit and understand size and all of that, you will learn a lot the second time through. All of these little variables, there's a lot to it, but can you tell I'm passionate about sweaters? I'm really passionate about sweaters, really passionate about swatching, and I'm really passionate about sweater fit. I want you to knit sweaters that fit you, because it's such an achievement when you finish a sweater, and it sucks when your sweater doesn't fit. Like, I want it to fit you. I want you to love it, because there's so much work that goes into it, and I'm proud of you, and I know you're proud of yourself, and you want to be able to wear it or give it to the person that you made it for and they get to wear it, and you want it to fit them. But you have to like keep all these little things in mind while you're doing it so that it does fit. All right, let me just see on comments. I'm a little behind because I'm just getting all worked up about sweaters. Pamela, Shadow Rose have saved your projects more than once, and you got that for my sweater class. I'm so glad. Sue, yes, your gauge is more accurate if you knit larger swatches. One of the things that I have really focused on in teaching about swatches is always make your swatch larger, wider, and longer than the pattern says. If the pattern is like 20 stitches and 26 rows and 4 inches or 10 centimeters, I'm going to cast on probably closer to 30 stitches and knit like 35 rows so that I'm measuring the interior away from the sides. Martha, you love math. That is great. And yes, Diana is saying sometimes a sweater is designed to fit better on some body types or shapes. That may be true. Some of it is just knowing what you like for fit. So I don't design anything that is specific to fit one certain type of body. And as long as the sizing is done really well, and as over the years, I've definitely become, I think, a better designer for across the spectrum of my sizing, because I've come to understand and I've done real life research on bodies and figured out what makes the fit good and how how various body shapes and sizes like the fit. The thing with that is, you know what fits well for you. So I'm going to pick on Julia Norman. I remember saying one time that raglans just don't work for her because she's broad-shouldered. I think that's what the conversation was. And so she doesn't do a lot of raglans because it's just not the fit that works best for her shape. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't design raglans with everybody's shape and size in mind, but you may think every time I knit a drop shoulder or every time I knit a this kind, those don't fit my body as well as this other kind. So you can definitely kind of gear yourself toward the type of shapes in sweaters that fit you the very best and that give you the kind, and some of it's style too. You just might prefer a certain style. So there's a lot of variation out there, and it's great because then we can all choose what we like. Kay, hi Kay. Thank you. You love my books. Thank you. Thank you. And says often have to go back to them for basics and hints. I'm so grateful that you're able to use them. Leslie, you're so sweet. Leslie says, thank God I'm in knit camp. Best choice of my knitting experience. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Vic. Luana, we'd love to have you in knit camp. That would be wonderful. Luana has, we've connected over spinning, drop spindle spinning. Not that I'm any good at it. I sent my stuff to Luana. And yes, Rhonda agrees with the knit designer continuity. I am in no way, shape, or form saying don't knit from lots of designers. I think that once you kind of find your way and you get your groove, you become so confident and knowledgeable that you can knit anything from anybody, anywhere. I'm only talking about if you're just trying to really cement those foundations of fit and your size. It is really helpful to do a couple in a row from the same designer so that you can kind of start to see where you fit into that equation and how these little adjustments change your results. It's harder when you're doing that from a lot of different types of designs and a lot of designers and a lot of different ease variations, because you can't necessarily pull from it whether it was just the difference of the pattern or whether it was something that you did. So just to help you kind of really cement those foundational pieces. Thanks, Claudia. Kim almost always does too, learns so much. And the second one is where she plays with yarn choices. Exactly. Carly on my team was talking about recently, because when I met Carly, she was knitting entrelac scarves. That's the only thing she knew how to knit, if I remember correctly. And she just knit a whole bunch of them, just entrelac scarves. We met at a volunteer meeting for Upcycle Oregon, when I very first moved to Oregon, and she had knitting and I had knitting. And I was like, okay, we're going to be friends. Obviously we both care about our community and we volunteer and we care about the environment, and we're both knitters. So let's be friends. And of course we are still friends to this day. But when we first met, I was like, you can knit a sweater. She was like, well, really, I just knit this one thing over and over. I'm like, you can knit sweaters, just here. So now she's knitting all kinds of things. And she knit, actually, I think it was Soundtrack. Yes, she knit Soundtrack, did it once as written, and then was like, oh, then knit it again, steeked it. Now she's like, oh, now that I've done this, now I know I can knit anything and I can steek anything. And it's just that repetition. She did the same pattern a couple times. I mean, she's been knitting sweaters for a while now. Didn't start with Soundtrack, but it was interesting to watch those light bulb moments for her where she was like, oh, now that I've done this, I knit it the main way, and then I steeked, and then I knit it again. And she's like, now I totally know how to adjust patterns if I want to steek them. I know how to do this. So it really does help to have that kind of overlap of knowledge, because it builds on your understanding. Yes, Sarah, try it with one of my little sweaters. Absolutely. Laura says, this all makes sense. I will do some things differently now. You're making the light bulb go on. I'm so glad, because again, I sometimes feel like a broken record, and I'm like, they are not going to want to hear me talk about this again. I don't think they want to hear this. But the truth is, this is the same for me. I can hear the same stuff over and over, but until I'm doing it and it really sticks, some of that's floating away. Probably not going to stick in my brain, but every time we do it, something else is going to stick. So if I can give you one new thing that sticks today, it's going to make your sweater knitting that much better. And all your knitting, not just sweaters, but I'm a sucker for sweaters. So, hi, Heidi. Yes. Jana, great question, comment about different needles change outcome. very true. So one time somebody sent me an email and said, actually, I'm not sure if it was an email or if it's on a Facebook comment about, so should I be swatching with, like, I think they swatched with, I don't know how this made sense for them, but they knit a swatch using different needles and different yarn than they were going to use in the sweater, and then said, should I be swatching with the same needles and same yarn? And, or someone else who said, I've swatched with that yarn before with that same needle size, I still have my swatch, can I just use that? Okay, so those are two examples of things that we may have all done. No judgment here, there's no knitting police in Olive Knits land. But if you've thought that or done those things, let's just go back to the foundation of successful knitting, and that is you need to know your gauge today with the needles and the yarn that you're going to use for your sweater. Not a swatch you knit last year. My knitting is looser now than it was a couple years ago. I don't know why. All of a sudden I knit more loosely. I don't know what happened. Am I more relaxed? I doubt it. Am I just older and I can't see? Maybe. I don't know. But not just the needle size, but the needle type. So I'm just reaching here for whatever I've got next to me. I have a loose tip from a signature that's not attached to a cord, and then a couple of little, I wasn't prepared for this, but different needle composition will affect the drag of the yarn on your needles. It will change your gauge. Sometimes slightly and you won't notice. Other times it is very noticeable. So if you swatch on a bamboo needle and then you knit on a metal needle, your gauge could be very different. So swatch with the exact needles that you are going to knit your sweater with. It makes a big difference. And I'll tell you what, we've all done it, but really, really notice that every little thing that you do that varies from the way you knit that original swatch can lead to like incremental and exponential changes in the results. Hi, Doris. Rhonda says, I've literally never knit the same pattern twice, not even socks. I really love my Beekeeper and soundtrack and would love to knit both again. Well, I completely get that. I very rarely knit the same thing twice. But if you do, it's a really good way to learn. It really does give you a lot of good information. You build with experience. Hi, Josie. And Carly is agreeing with knitting multiple times and being able to understand fit and make something she absolutely loves. Thank you. Tina says, I never sound like the Charlie Brown teacher. Wah, wah, wah. Vic says, I've knit mini sweaters, but my campfire cardigan is my favorite ever for fit. That's great. And one thing you can do is if you knit something that fits you super well, identify why, okay? What size was it? How much ease did it have? What size are you? What's the difference between your size and the finished measurement of the sweater? That tells you the ease. What's the arm circumference measurement? What is yours? Like when you know those numbers of what fits you beautifully, you can look for other patterns that have that same fit or choose your next size based on that same fit. It's super helpful. Hi, Susan. You know what? You can rewatch this. So it's okay if you came in late. Go back to the beginning. I basically just gave a free sweater fit workshop this morning because I'm like really committed to everyone knitting sweaters that feel awesome and fit them really well. And you can find more of this information on my blog. You can find more of this information in my books. And I don't have any classes up right now, but when they are, I have classes on sweater fit, and it's really good information that you'll use over and over. But I have a lot of free stuff out there. So in the meantime, rewatch this, go read all the things on my blog, sign up for my newsletter. If you don't get my newsletter, in fact, I'm going to elaborate on this topic in today's newsletter. Go to olivenits.com, sign up for my All of the Things newsletter. I'm late getting it out today because if I don't write it on Sunday, I know I'm going to come in here and be on video with you and I just can't get it out in the morning, so it's going to go out later. But I'm going to elaborate on this, and I'm going to give some links for where you can find articles on my blog that go into more explanation on all of these things that we talked about today. So if you are willing to do some clicking and some reading, you can basically have maybe I need to slow down, a free sweater class in a nutshell today. So make sure you're on that newsletter if you're not already, because I'm going to send that out in a few hours. But you can rewatch this video. Like, there's a lot of good content, but the best learning is doing. The best learning is just knitting some sweaters. I have met so many knitters who are afraid to knit a sweater because they want to get to a certain level of their knitting before they feel like they're worthy or they're advanced enough to knit a sweater. You are ready to knit a sweater now. If you can knit and purl, and you know how to knit two together, and you know how to knit front back, or make an increase, make a decrease, you can learn as you go. And if you haven't already pre-ordered my new book, Knit a Little, this is really wrinkled, and I'm sorry because this was crammed in a bag, but you can practice on little stuff. It's just a miniature version of what you will knit for yourself, but it helps you learn. It helps you start to understand. So, as you see other people who comment wherever they may be on any kind of platform, and they're like, I knit this thing and it didn't fit, and they feel disappointed, but they also feel like they're a victim of that mystery, the mystery of sweaters. Like, sometimes they fit, sometimes they don't, and nobody knows why. Maybe you can help spread this message that a pattern is really math, and it doesn't have to be a mystery. There's just a couple of things you can do in the beginning to make sure that your sweater's gonna fit you. We are getting a train, but last time everyone assured me that it wasn't as loud for you as it is for me, hopefully. Good morning, Julie. Good morning, Tammy. I'm really behind on comments. Hold on, I'm scrolling. Diane says, I wish more designers would show the pattern on more real bodies. I was talking to a friend about another designer. She's always the model for her sweaters, and she's very small. And when this, hold on. And the sweaters always look very odd fitting. I've never looked closely at them. As a result, when I looked at the finished projects, I was like, wow, maybe I could wear that. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that when I have patterns come out, I have people test them that are a variety of sizes. And I remembered last week, I was like, somebody sent me an email. It was Marilyn Hartman last week sent me an email where she was saying that same thing. Like, it's so helpful to see sweaters on different body types, because then you can envision how it's going to fit for you. So definitely, when you go to look at sweater patterns, if you can find some pictures of people who've made them, it helps if you're in a community like Knit Camp, or even in my Olive Knit Student Lounge here on Facebook, where you can see the results of other people and how they fit their bodies, keeping in mind that everyone is subject to these same sweater rules, so to speak, these foundational issues. So if they knit something that doesn't fit them well, it may be more that maybe they needed to change their size, maybe their gauge wasn't quite what they thought. I'll tell you what, if you knit something and you're like, but my gauge was spot on, I would recommend going back and measuring your gauge in the sweater to see, because a lot of times it changes. It reminds me of poor Erica. I'm just picking on my team today. I'm just telling all my team stories. But Erica, when I first met her, I was working for a yarn shop, and she started working there as well. That's how we met. And she knit one of my very early designs, and as a test knitter. And Erica is a meticulous swatcher. She has like a catalog of her swatches. They're just beautiful and meticulous. And she swatched for the pattern. And then actually it was, sorry, train. It's like shaking the room, right? So she knit, it was Bee Water, which then became Still Water, which in the new Knit a Little book is called Waterfall for little babies. I'll show it to you, hold on. But anyway, she was like, I swatched and my swatch was perfect. And knowing her, it was perfect. It's this one right here. Look how cute that is. And she's like, but this is huge. this is really big. And I was still a very new designer, so I was totally doubting my math and like, oh my gosh, did I mess up the math? And I'm like recalculating everything because again, it is just math. I was like, the math checks out. So I said, are you sure you got gauge? And she was like holding up her beautiful, perfect swatch. And she's like, her precious baby angel. She was holding it up. And I was like, okay, but did your gauge change in your sweater? She was like, I don't think so. And then we measured it and it changed a lot. It was like, I can't remember, maybe 7 inches larger because her gauge was like 1 to 2 stitches bigger because she'd relaxed and she was knitting into it. So as we knit and as we see results from other people, don't necessarily judge a pattern based on how you see it fit someone, especially if maybe, there are a lot of variables. So if the fit might not be quite right, it might just be that the person needed a different size or maybe their gauge changed. There's a lot of variables, but it can at least help you see sweaters on different bodies. I just kind of wanted to put that out there because sometimes we see a sweater and think, wow, that sweater pattern's, not a good fit. But really it's just we as the knitters need to adjust our tactics a little bit. I see everybody talking about happy birthday and I missed whose birthday it is, but whoever it is, happy birthday. Alicia, Stillwater is still kicking your butt because you lose place with where you're at. How can I stay on track? I'm writing my pattern on my pattern in circles. Is there something else I can do? I'll think about that, Alicia. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. I'll have Erica and Carly remind me, and I'll try and think of a way to, I think I'll need some visual aids. So I'll come back and we'll talk about that next week. Tammy, you're going to knit Fia again for your sister. Yes, Julie mentioned the Knit Companion app. I don't use that, but I've heard a lot of people say that helps them following patterns. Okay, I don't know whose birthday. I missed it. Rhonda says, I write fairly extensive Ravelry notes so I can go back and know what I did that was perfect and maybe not so much. Keeping track of your own notes and your own decision making along the way is really powerful. When you don't know what you did, you don't know how to do better next time or adjust to get better results. I mean, the cool thing is, no matter how it turns out, it'll fit somebody. It's just maybe not going to fit the person you wanted it to fit. And what I want for you is to knit something that feels so good that you're like, I want to knit more sweaters. Because I've told this story before, but when my grandma taught me to knit when I was little, she, at the time, she was living at Charlie Brown Holler in Tennessee in the backwoods. And I don't think she was very connected to any other knitters. I don't think she even really knew anything about the knitting industry. And as far as she knew, knitting was dying out. Now, we obviously know that's not true, but this is before internet, and I didn't have internet at home when she taught me. So I thought I was the only knitter, basically, in the state of Kansas where I grew up. And so she was like, it's your job to, teach people to knit so that this isn't going to die out. It's so important. Everyone, we need to keep this tradition alive. Now that seems ridiculous and hilarious because obviously it was not solely on my shoulders to keep knitting alive, but I did think it was when I was a kid. I was like, oh my gosh, I have been bequeathed, like the mission has been, bestowed upon me to keep knitting alive. And so I really have kind of had this underlying thread of, I want to keep people knitting. I want to keep this tradition alive. It's my mission in life. And it's thankfully the mission of many thousands and thousands and thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of people who also want to keep everyone knitting. So thank goodness it's not a solo job because I wouldn't be able to do it by myself. But it is important to me to keep spreading the joy of knitting. And I know that the more confident you feel as a knitter and the better your results are, the more you're going to want to knit. And I want you to want to knit because I want this tradition to carry on. And I want you to teach other people how to knit so that we just keep exponentially growing. So then pretty soon everyone knits. And it's just the way things are. Christy, you're dying to knit another beekeeper. The first beekeeper was your very first sweater. Yeah, you just need more time. That's an amazing first sweater. You're welcome, Gail. Rewatch and take notes. Absolutely. Oh, I'm so back. I'm so far back on comments. Vicky, best sweater ever and sweater whisperer. Best sweater whisperer. Wow, best sweater whisperer. No. Sweater whisperer was my first sweater fit class. Best sweater ever is sort of this part 2. We go into much more detail. So I've kind of been adapting those so that now they're very standalone. And when they come back on my website, the Sweater Whisperer is kind of like that good overview of the nuts and bolts and understanding kind of how to get the big picture of a good fitting sweater. Best Sweater Ever takes it much deeper, and we go into yarn substitutions, and we go into really how to make these changes and how to really investigate the yarn and get the right fabric. And so it's kind of like the part 2 of Sweater Whisperer, so it goes much more in depth. Tammy, the first thing you ever knit was a cabled sweater when you were a teenager. That's what's amazing, is when you learn young, and or just if you don't have anybody else giving you information and telling you that's too hard, you don't know what's too hard. So you just knit whatever's in front of you. That's awesome. So that probably takes away a lot of fear of new things, because you're like, well, I started with cabled sweaters. Joanne says, fabric choices are my Waterloo, trying to adapt a pattern to something that isn't wool. When everything calls for wool can change everything. Drape, stretch, absolutely. Joanne, you know what? Not to send you away from my work, because I, of course, love having you in my knitting circle. And I definitely have a couple of patterns like Lace Market, not designed for wool. That is a linen blend. But I agree, I don't have a lot of cotton things. But there is a designer, Knit Eco Chic. Lindsay is her name. I actually haven't seen, I haven't seen what she's up to in a couple years, but I know that she had a wool allergy, so she had designed a lot of things that were specifically non-wool. So that might be something that for anybody who is like, I cannot wear wool, period. And because yes, the fiber content difference makes a really big difference. She might have something that would be, you might be able to learn some things from her patterns. I don't know. I haven't knit her stuff, but I just remember that she had things that were for wool allergy, like non-wool blends. So, oh, I know, Rhonda, so exciting. Everyone's loving the train. That's good. Monica, I'm so glad. Monica says, my guidance has been key for the patterns. Christy says, I still wear my beekeeper since it fits better now during COVID. I know. I was putting on some pants today and I was like, well, these are spandex jeans now. So maybe I need new jeans, or maybe I need to get on my Peloton. Right, Leslie Capone? Amy says, I absolutely agree with knitting little things. My first raglan sweater was for a doll on size 1 toothpick-like needles. Vicky says, ease is always my issue. I love your sweaters and the fit is great, but always feel like there should be more ease. I think my next one will be the next larger size. Well, that's the thing, Vicky, is knowing the right ease for you. Choosing your size is 100% you're the boss of it. You choose the size that gives you the fit that you like. And so never feel like when you're looking at a pattern that if your size 44 bust that you have to knit the 44 or whatever. You knit the ease that is the ease you want. Some people are like, I don't want a lot of extra ease. Some people are like, I don't want it to cling to my arms. I want more ease. Those are personal preferences. And so always go up if you want that extra wiggle room. Always. It's fantastic. It's like one of the best things about knitting is you can adapt it and make it your own. Yes, measure gauge as you go because it can change. Oh my goodness. I did talk about ease. Julia, go back to the beginning and rewatch. I talked about a lot. This is basically a free sweater masterclass, and you didn't even know that's what you're getting this morning. Let's see. Lots of birthdays. Jency's birthday too. Oh my gosh, happy birthday to everyone having birthdays today. And I'm way behind on comments. I was a very serious child, Vicky. I'm still a very serious person. It doesn't seem like it, I know, because I'm also like very enthusiastic, but I'm a thinker, and I'm like very, very, these wheels were always spinning, but I was a super serious kid. I was like a book reader, writing, journaling. I mean, I knit and I cross-stitched breadcloths when I was a kid. I was like a debater, and I was kind of a nerd. I wasn't a cheerleader or any of those things. I was like really worried about my grades. That was me. And you know what? I like me. I don't care. That's just who I am. I'm all right. Patty says in the 80s, knitting was really in the ropes and a lot of yarn stores went out of business. I actually never went to a yarn store. You know, you guys have all heard this story, and I've got to go because my team meeting is like in 30 seconds. We're going to meet late. Sorry. We're talking about sweaters. I can't stop. But I didn't go to a yarn store till I was in my 20s, and I'd been knitting since 10 or 11 years old. And the first yarn store I went to was Brown Sheep Wool Factory. Like, when they, like, the factory, like that was the first place I saw that sold real wool. So I don't think I saw a proper yarn store. Gosh, I'm trying to think. It might have been Colorado. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the name of the store. I think there was a yarn store in Aurora, Colorado, like maybe 15 years ago that I went to, and I was like, like lights came through the clouds and angels were singing. It was amazing. And I still to this day am a huge advocate for yarn stores. I think it's one of the most amazing things to have a yarn store within reach. If you don't find a yarn store online that you can kind of connect with and fall in love with, and they can become your local yarn store virtually. But oh my gosh, like what a wonderful resource. And I didn't have that through all the years of my knitting. So I just absolutely love that we have local yarn stores, and I hope that we all support them because they're wonderful. Same with dyers. Like, I just really love that people are making it possible for us to keep knitting, making beautiful yarn, raising sheep, selling yarn to us, and teaching through yarn shops. I mean, all of these resources are so powerful, and they give us this community. So very important, and hopefully we get to keep all of these things going over the years as we continue to knit. Yes, Fia takes 4 days to dry. Absolutely. Okay, I've got to scroll. Yes, all needlework is making a comeback. Joanne, yes. You know what? Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Joanne is asking, I promise this is going to end here in a minute. I knew this was going to go long because I just can't stop talking about sweaters and gauge, but that is a really good question. Joanne said, as a designer, could I put some extra thought into maybe swatching with a non-wool fiber? I could even have someone test it with a non-wool fiber. Joanne, would you be interested in being a test knitter? And in fact, I have a new pattern in mind. If you'd be interested in being a test knitter, we could kind of work on that and, you know, make sure the fabric and the, you know, the drape, like I could do some math behind the scenes and some planning, and then you could test out my concept and make sure that it works. So we can talk about that, but you're right. I mean, that could be something that I could start to build into some of my patterns. Not all patterns work beautifully in every fiber, but I might be able to find alternative fibers as good substitutes. So I'm going to work on that. I'll put that on my list. Oh, yay, Sarah, I'm so glad. Hi, Jennifer. You're running your North channel. Yay. Oh my goodness. Pam, you still have a fear of Fia. I know, Leslie. I told my husband I just need to bring my Peloton here to the studio. I might ride it more. Tina made the Fia sleeves more narrow. Yay. Okay. Oh my gosh. My virtual yarn store. Yes. Not another hat. Absolutely. No, don't end. Okay. Bye, Z and Lynn. Always looking for a good hand spun pattern. That's another thing. Like, that would be really interesting to try and factor that in. The hard thing with hand spun, certainly is the variables there, but I will keep these little nuggets in my mind and think about ways that I could elaborate on that. And oh, good. If the tips have helped, then great. All right, I'm gonna let you go. One quick thing I have to end. Oh, great, Joanne, we'll get in touch. Send us an email. You know how to reach us, and we'll work on that together. You can be my guinea pig. What do you think? I've done that before with sizing. I've brought on some guinea pigs who helped me so much, and were just so wonderful with their insights about how the adapted designs worked for them, and that will really help me. So, yay. Oh, Christy says the soundtrack and happy hour contrasts are great for handspun. Adina, great. Yes, plus size, absolutely, that would be wonderful. I love designing for all the bodies. Something I had not really thought about, and it had been a blind spot in my work, certainly, was thinking about people who want to knit and cannot knit them because of the wool. That was absolutely a blind spot, and I really hadn't thought about it until now. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. One quick thing I want to end, kind of like on a happy but bad note. Okay, so the new book is here, but it's not here. It's here, and it's adorable, but there was a delay at the bindery. So we were all ready to pack and ship all the orders on Friday, and the books weren't arriving. We're like, hey, where's the books? We're ready to ship. And there was a delay at the bindery, and it's going to be a few more weeks. And I'm mortified, and I'm so sorry. I'm going to be emailing everyone who pre-ordered so that you have information about when to expect it. But we're still going to do all the events this week because we're still going to party like it's 1995. No, 1995, 1999. What am I talking about? Okay. So ending on a happy third book, sad delay, which is really disappointing. I had a really hard weekend thinking about it. It took me until this morning to recover from my disappointment, and I just did not want to have to tell you. But we're still going to party. We're still going to have some wonderful prizes this week. We're going to have some wonderful events. You'll get your books very, very soon. It'll be worth the wait. There are 24 fun little projects in there, just like this cute little tugboat beanie. I know thank you for being patient. Thank you for understanding. I am devastated like the rest of you, but I wanted you to see that it's real. It's a real book. Look, it's just, I don't have any to send you. I'm so sad. Anyway, soon, but in the meantime, check those swatches, check your knitting, sign up. Thank you, Heidi. Sign up for, it is frustrating. Check your email if you pre-ordered. If you're a VIP, you'll get an email. If you just pre-ordered the book, you'll get an email. So emails are going out today to give you a little more information. And Kim knows I literally was printing shipping labels Friday because I really thought we were shipping. So Kim knows because I was like, did you get your shipping confirmation? She's like, yes. And then, no. So I'm so sorry about that, but it'll be worth the wait. And in the meantime, we're going to have a ton of fun. We're going to have a great week. We're going to party anyway, because you know what? When life gives you lemons, we're going to make some lemon cheesecake and lemonade and all the lemon things. And you're still knitting, right? You got some knitting to do. And so, but last but not least, if you're not on my newsletter, but you liked this conversation and you want a little bit more information, Carly put the link in there. If you don't see the link, go to my website, oliveKnits.com. Just scroll down the page and there's a thing that says, I don't know, get the updates or something. Sign up for that because I'm going to send later today an email with bullet points and links to some really great blog posts that follow up on this same topic that can kind of go in more depth about yarn choice, about ease, about all those things. So make sure you do that if you're not already so that you can get all those great tips. And then next week, we'll talk about more knitting things. We'll talk about all of the things. So have a great day, everybody. And sorry to my team that we're going to be 10 minutes late, but we're going to get there. Have a great day, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.